Hello everyone. You may notice this video looks a little different than the normal subjects we cover on the channel. We got our Liberace tribute candelabra up there. I'm no Liberace, but ever since I was a kid I always enjoyed tinkering around on the piano, mostly self-taught, just doing it for fun. Anyways, I was at a thrift store one day and I had the opportunity to buy this piano. This piano is a Steinway. And if you know anything about pianos, a Steinway is a very respected brand of pianos. And I paid $300 for the piano. And at the time I bought the piano was functioning good. Everything was all right with the piano. So I had the piano sitting in a storage room. And the storage room suffered some damage during one of our storms and had a leaky roof. And as a consequence, the piano received some water damage during that storm. So the storage room company, of course everything is insured, they gave me $2,500 to compensate me for the piano. So I'm way ahead as far as the money is concerned on the piano. I paid $300, the piano got some damage in the storage room, they gave me a check for $2,500, so I'm ahead of the game as far as that's concerned. But unfortunately that water damage did cause some issues with the piano. Some of which are cosmetic. You see some pieces fell off and we have a little bit of where the wood was swollen and dried back up. And additionally, some of the keys no longer work. Okay, like that one right there doesn't work. This one stays down a lot of the time. This one is down over here. So we have maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 stuck keys, and some of them the action is a little bit slow on them. And the other thing that happened is obviously it went way out of tune from that. And this front board got a little bit swollen. So I'm no piano technician, okay? I have never taken a piano apart before. I don't know the correct terminology for the pieces, nothing like that, okay? But I am a tinkerer, so I'm gonna try to take this thing apart and see if we can figure out what's causing those keys to stick. And then I think I'm going to download an app on the telephone and see if it can attempt to give the piano a halfway decent tuning, okay? This piano is not going to Carnegie Hall, okay? It's just something that we keep in the house just to fool around with, all right? It's nothing serious. And like I said, no harm, no foul. So we're going to take it apart, see what we discover, see if we can clean up the piano a little bit and get it functioning again. And we'll see how it goes. I hope that you're going to enjoy following along on this video. Okay, here's a closer look at some of the damage we have. You see where that's all broken open right there from the water? You can see that this veneer is missing. There's some here. Some of the joints are a little bit swollen. I mean, this piano has been drying out for a long time, and those pieces are what they are. As I mentioned before, that front board got some damage to it. You can see there, got a chip there. I do have the music holder, but that broke in half also. And I have a bench. So the first thing I'm gonna do is figure out how to take these boards off here so that we can get to the action. And I know that this bottom panel removes also. I don't know if that'll be necessary to remove that, but I'll probably take it off just to be on the safe side. So let me take a look at it and we'll get started. With the lid closed, you can see that the surface also has some damage from the water hitting it. I removed that bottom panel. That just pulls off. There's no fasteners there. And another thing that we noticed is this block right here, which supports this front leg, it's damaged right there, it's cracked. And obviously that's real important because the piano is very heavy and you need to make sure that it's supported properly. So we'll take a look at that. We may need to reinforce that. Look at it later. So let's see how this piece, there's two little dogs in here that put pressure on that piece. So this just lifts out of here. Okay, so that front panel is just pressed down there with those screws right there. And it looks like this assembly that holds the lid in place is just pressed in there. There's no fasteners that hold that in place. It looks like that whole thing will lift up. So didn't really have to remove any fasteners. Everything is just kind of pressed in there to allow easy maintenance. So let me get that all off of there and we'll get started. Okay, so when I opened up the inside of the piano, somebody had put like this little dehumidifier element in there. The cord is a little dry rotted on it. I'm just going to toss this thing. We have central air conditioning in the house, and the need for a dehumidifier is long past with this piano, so we're just going to toss that. Alright, we're inside the bowels of the piano, and you can see there those water stains where that water infiltrated in there. I'm going to remove these thumb screws right there and see if I could remove this piece, the action I guess you would call it. And one thing I did notice in some of these areas, if you look at these pins where the keys slide up and down on these pins, okay, these are all corroded where the water got in there. So I think I'm going to take every key off and clean up all those pins, and then I think that's going to help out the action, because some of these you could just see the corrosion on there. There's no way that those keys could slide easily with that. So I'm going to start with the simple things first, and then, you know, if we need to get into sanding any of these down to create a little clearance on the sides, we could do that. But let me start with the simple things first, just cleaning those pins, and we'll take it from there. Alright, so that part there, the action, that just lifted out once I removed those thumb screws. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each key off of here, polish up those pins. And also I may give a light sanding on the sides of each key just so that they have enough clearance. I'll check this little area here. This has to slide up and down here, so we'll check that. Let me get started. Only 88 to do. The good thing is all the keys are numbered, so there's no question on where each key goes. Alright, we got all of our pins cleaned up. There was quite a bit of corrosion on those pins, and I also got everything vacuumed out in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub a little Teflon on each one of those pins just to make sure that the action on them is real nice and smooth. And as far as the keys are concerned, where some of the water hit the keys, those little holes on the bottom swelled up a little bit. So I got a little pin here, and I'm going to take it and make sure that all of those holes are opened up correctly, and put each key back into position where it was before. They're all numbered, so that's pretty straightforward. So let me get going on that. So I'm removing the fiber washers and the felt from each one of these oval pins so I can get down there and clean all that corrosion off there. See that right there? Fingernail doesn't slide at all on that thing. Okay, the reinstallation of the keys is going nicely. One thing I'm doing as I'm putting them in is I'm checking them and kind of making sure that they're level with each other. And there's a series of paper and fiber washers underneath these felt discs, and by removing or adding one or two washers there, kind of getting the keys leveled out. So it looks pretty good so far. Let me get the rest of these keys put back in. We got all the keys back in, and they're relatively level with each other. Now I'm going to use those 4 thumb screws and reattach the action mechanism. We'll try out the keys and make sure that they're all functioning. So I'll bring you guys back as soon as I put those thumb screws back in. So we got the action screwed back in. No problems with that. Now when I test the keys, that was one problematic key. The second. That's it. So when you do that repetition, they come back, no problem. And they look nice and level. So now I'm going to put this thing back together, and then we'll work on getting it tuned up. So as I was
putting this piece into position, I noticed when I had it fully seated that it was just starting to move a couple of the hammers a little bit, which to me tells me that it's too tight. So I'm going to put a couple thin washers underneath here where those pegs are that secured into position, and that'll raise it up just like a 32nd of an inch, and I think that that'll give it the clearance it needs. So we'll try that and hope for the best. Okay, we got the music rack glued up and clamped. As I mentioned earlier, that thing got snapped in half when the damage happened. Okay, this Ziploc bag has the remnants of whatever veneer pieces I could salvage off the piano, so I'm going to try to get those glued back on the best we can. You know, the reality is that this piano doesn't really have any value now because of that damage. It's unlikely in the future that somebody would ever want to buy a piano that's been exposed to water like that. I don't know if there's any problems with the soundboard, you know, that could have got swollen. All these pins really need to be pulled out and replaced because they were all corroded. So, you know, for our purposes as a clunker around the house, the piano's fine, but I don't want to put a lot of money into it because it's just not worth it. So I'm just going to give it a basic paint job. I'm going to try to match up this color as close as possible, and we're going to call it a day. Because of that damage, you know, there's no way to salvage the original finish. So, you know, I'm not going to spend all kinds of money on different kinds of lacquers and this and that because it's just simply not worth it. So we'll just give it a basic paint job and we'll carry on from there. Start getting it tuned up. We're getting things coated up. This paint is made by Behr, and it's a butterscotch color, and the finish on it is an eggshell. The reason why I went with that is because it'll hide some defects, and there's plenty of them on this particular piano. So we got that going. I haven't touched the legs yet because I need to fix that block on that one leg over there, so I'm just painting everything else except for the legs. So far, it's still wet, so you can see some variations in there, but once that dries, that color will even out. You can see there it's still wet. Looks pretty good, I think. And then I can go ahead and I can add some gold accents like what were on there originally once all the paint dries, and I think it'll be a pretty good representation of how the piano looked before we started. So I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, so on the left leg I glued that little support bracket back up, and it seems to be pretty solid. It looks like there's a integral nut right here that leg screws onto, and then there's another long screw that goes into this shoulder type area here. And this screw that protrudes right there, that's supposed to screw into this block, but when I removed that block, there was no screw holding it in place. You know, that just lifted right out, so that's an indication to me that this hole is a little bit stripped out. So if you could see right there, I put a piece of dowel in there, and I'm going to put some wood glue in there. When I screw it back together, that'll reinforce that hole a little bit. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and I have our 2 spacing washers right there just to give that rail a little extra clearance above those keys. So let me get this thing put back together here. Alright, so we ran into a little snag here upon reassembly. And anytime that you're working on a project, you could always expect to run into a couple snags. If you never run into a snag before, you haven't done many projects. Anyways, when I went to put this back together, if you look closely here, you notice that this gap from here to here is larger than the gap from here to here. I've gone ahead and I've planed this down. Prior to planing it down, I had to kind of tap this in with a hammer, and what that was doing was that was causing that board that rides along the keys there to warp, and some of the keys were not operating as freely as they should. As I mentioned before, you know, this whole thing does have a little bit of a warp to it. So what I did was I recently rebuilt this jointer, and I don't think I ever showed this thing on camera before, but anyways, it's got all brand new blades in there, and it's got a 1 horsepower motor down there. That same motor is also used to power my little planer. But anyways, this thing's got a lot of power behind it, and I took a little bit of material off these corner blocks here. As you can see right there, that joiner did a fantastic job. And now I believe that I have enough clearance on both of those when I go to reassemble this that I'm compensating for that warpage over there. So let me get it back together, and hopefully that's going to solve that problem. So I ended up going with this app called Piano Meter, and I did pay like 25 bucks for the app. I chose it above the free apps because it's a little bit more comprehensive and the way that it works, and it's real easy to use. Basically, you play all the keys on your piano, and it listens to them, and it creates a little curve. And then I also bought this little tuning kit on Amazon for like 20 bucks. And as you tune the strings on the piano, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the blue dots to line up on that curve there, and that's the goal. It's pretty easy. So I'm going along and I'm tuning the keys on the piano. You could see that I've already given a bunch of them a tuning, and you could see how far out of tune the other ones were. And then what I'm going to do is I'll finish up the piano, the painting and everything, move the piano back into the house, and then play the piano for a while. And I'm sure it's going to go out of tune because it was so far out to begin with. And then, maybe a month or so from now or 2 months from now, I'll go back and tune it again and bring all the keys up that went out of tune. So it is a little bit time consuming using this thing. A lot of the keys have 3 strings apiece, and it is a little bit time consuming. Because I've played the piano since I was a kid, I would consider myself as a person who does have a little bit of an ear. So I can kind of tell, if something doesn't sound exactly right just from playing the piano for all those years. So that's definitely helpful. Anyways, I'm going to carry on getting this thing tuned up. So I decided to splurge and buy another Steinway & Sons decal. This one is a little bit different from the one that was on there. This is a little bit of an older style, but these original Steinway decals are real expensive when you go to buy them, and I didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars for a decal. So this is good enough. And it is an original Steinway decal, and it's a dry rub transfer. So I'm just going to use a popsicle stick and put that on there, and I'll give it a little clear coat with a dull spray just to kind of protect it a little bit. It's better than nothing. Okay, there's our decal. Really gives the piano a nice touch, and I sprayed it with a couple coats of clear coat just to protect it. Now I got to work on applying a little bit of gold leaf paint around the piano. There was some gold trim around parts of the piano. I'll just do that a little bit. I'm not going to get carried away with it, and I will get this project wrapped up. Alright, so I got all the keys tuned up in the first of what will probably be several tunings. We can consider this a rough tuning. I don't know how many years it's been since that piano was tuned last, and between that and the water damage on the right side of the piano, I'm not expecting it to hold much of a tune. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piano, I'm going to move it into the house where it's going to be living, play the piano for a month or two, let everything go out of tune that's going to go out of tune, and then I'll tighten it up again. That's the nice thing about having an app. I can just tighten it up myself. And I've also been reapplying the gold trim, just kind of mimicking what was on there. It's not exactly the same as it was before, but it gives a good overall impression of it. I'm using this one-shot Sign Painter's metallic gold. That paint is fairly expensive, but I've had good luck with it in the past. So making good progress. I'm going to get the piano moved into the house, and we'll show you the final product. Alright, so we hit another snag, and that snag is that this top cover piece does not fit in the piano without me hitting it with a hammer to tap it in, and that's due to the fact that the shoulder is a little bit warped, and the problem is it's such a tight fit that if I hammer that in, I'm going to gouge up all our new paint that we put on there. And plus it should be easier to remove it when you need to tune it in the future, and this piano is going to need at least a couple more tunings. So the challenge is to try to trim a little bit off these edges here. I only need to take really about 1/8 of an inch off of each side, which would be more than enough. That'll leave a little That'll leave a little gap in here, but that'll be okay. We can live with that. It's too small of a cut to use like the circular saw or jigsaw, or I could use a plane, like a block plane, but that's going to be a little bit tedious doing it like that. I could use my die grinder, but I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to use the router and to use what's called a flush cutting bit. And let me take you over to the workbench and I'll show you that. This is the flush cutting bit, and you notice it has that bearing on the bottom of it, and that's made to ride along a guide piece. So I made a little test cut over here, and I set this up as a guide for the bearing to roll along, and this mimics the workpiece, and as you can see, it cuts it flush with that. So I just bought this thing over at Home Depot. You know how much these router bits are? This thing was like $40 for that one bit. I mean, that is insane. Anyways, now that we've made our test cut, and I'm pretty confident that that's going to work, we're going to set up the actual piece with a guide block underneath there, and we're just going to try to take a little bit off of both ends, and hopefully we won't damage anything. Alright, so that's working out fine. Just made a small cut there. Now I'll have to reposition my guide blocks because this is kind of that step shape, but that's no problem. I'll just move it around until I get everything trimmed off the edges, and I'll touch that up with a little paint, and we'll be good to go. Okay, we got that cover on there. It's fitting in there beautifully. It goes in and out without gouging up the paint. Of course, the compromise we made on that was now you have a slightly larger space on that side, but that's what it took to get around that warpage on that right shoulder of the piano. This ended up being a little bit of a bigger job than I thought to trim both of those sides. I ended up using not only the router, a little bit of die grinder action, and also this Japanese flush cutting saw. Those things come in handy for precision work when you need them. Anyways, we did a nice neat job on that. So we're ready to move on to the next part. Okay, here's the finished piano. I think it came out looking pretty respectable considering what we started with. That lamp on top of the piano was on top of the spinet piano we had when I was a kid. I got to get a shade for it. It had the type of shade that clips on the bulb. I'll find one online. But overall, I think the piano came out looking pretty good. Like I said, I gave it a rough tuning, and I'm sure it's going to require at least a couple more tunings. But we'll sit down and play it for a couple seconds, let you guys check it out. Everyone, well, I appreciate you following along on this video. This was more of a voiceover giving you an overview of what I did as opposed to a step-by-step type of thing where I show everything that I'm doing. I certainly wouldn't recommend that anyone takes a Steinway piano and do what I did, but it was a fun project. I hope you enjoyed checking it out. I think the results came out pretty good, and hopefully you think the same. And another month from now or so, we'll give it another tuning and call it good. Take care. We'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.